Welcome to our deep dive all about personal finance. Our listeners have sent us a really cool mix of sources this time, right?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
Some real classics in there, like Your Money or Your Life.
that's right. And Your Money, The Missing Manual by J.D. Roth. We've got a lot to unpack, but
Definitely.
what I'm really curious about is, we always hear so much about the link between money and happiness, but is it really that simple?
Well, that's what's so fascinating, right? Like, so many people just assume that, more money equals more happiness. The more you get, the better off you'll be. But I think these sources actually paint a much more nuanced picture.
For sure. So let's get into that. Where do we even begin to unpack that?
I think it's worth acknowledging right off the bat that, yeah, of course, money matters. Like, we need money to meet our basic needs, right? Food, shelter, security, all that.
Right. Makes sense.
But the thing is, there's a ton of research from psychologists who actually study happiness, and they've found that after a certain point, more money doesn't actually equal more happiness.
Interesting.
Yeah, like Ed Diener and Robert Biswas Diener, they wrote this book called Happiness, and they found that once your basic needs are met, the impact of income on your overall happiness is, well, surprisingly small.
Wow. Okay. But what about all those people who are striving to become millionaires and stuff? What are they missing, you think?
I think maybe they're missing the concept of enough. Both Your Money and Your Money or Your Life really hammer home that idea. Like, understanding what enough means to you is way more important than chasing after, some arbitrary definition of rich.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Oh.
But how do we even figure out what enough looks like in our own lives? Like, how do we define that for ourselves?
Right, yeah. And that's where things get really, really interesting because in Your Money or Your Life, they actually have this idea. They call it the fulfillment curve.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially what it shows is how the happiness we get from spending actually levels off after a certain point. Like, you get that extra gadget or the bigger house and you might get a little boost of happiness, but it doesn't actually buy you lasting contentment.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, so if it's not about blindly accumulating more, then the question becomes, how do we actually align our finances with our values and find that sweet spot of enough?
Exactly, yeah. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And I think a huge part of that is setting the right goals for ourselves.
Goals, yeah, for sure. Have you come across, that concept of SMART goals before?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, me too. Do you find that's actually a useful framework when you're thinking about, personal finances?
I think it's incredibly useful because, Your Money, the book, it really champions this idea of setting SMART goals. So, goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed.
Right. SMART. Got it.
Yeah. And the idea is, when you're setting goals with all those elements in place, they become much more powerful tools for actually changing your behavior, They're not just these vague wishes anymore.
That's such a good point. Do you have any, inspiring real-world examples of that?
Yeah.
Of how SMART goals have actually helped people achieve things in their finances?
Yeah, absolutely. So Your Money actually tells this really cool story about this couple, Sabino and Kim. And their big dream was for Kim to be able to stay home with their kids. And initially, it seemed like totally impossible.
Wow.
Right. But they sat down, they broke down their finances, they set these really specific SMART goals, and they stuck to their plan. And you know what? They actually made it happen.
That's awesome. That's so inspiring.
Yeah, it really is. It's a good reminder that achieving these big goals often starts with taking small, deliberate steps,
Absolutely. It's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Exactly. So, speaking of taking action, maybe we can shift gears a little bit and talk about something that often gets kind of a bad rap. Budgeting.
Oh, yeah, budgeting.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people, they hear that word and they're like, ugh, no thanks. It just sounds so restrictive and boring, right?
Yeah, it definitely has that reputation. But what if we looked at it differently? What if instead of thinking of it as this straitjacket, we thought of it as more of a roadmap, like a roadmap that guides you toward your financial destination?
I like that. I like that a lot. It's way more positive.
Right, because who doesn't want a reliable map, especially when you're navigating something as important as your personal finances, right?
For sure. So what are some of the different budgeting frameworks that are out there?
Well, Your Money actually outlines a bunch of different approaches, each with their own kind of, philosophy. Have you ever heard of the 50-30-20 method?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But I could use a refresher. What's the basic idea behind it?
Yeah. Sure, yeah. So basically, it suggests dividing your take-home income into three main buckets. 50% goes toward your needs, like essential stuff, housing, transportation, groceries, all that.
Okay, that makes sense. 50% for needs.
Right. And then 30% goes towards your wants. So, the fun stuff, dining out, entertainment, hobbies, travel, whatever brings you joy.
Got it. So needs, wants, what's the last bucket?
The last 20% goes towards savings and debt repayment, building that financial security.
So that's the 50-30-20 method.
Yeah.
What are some of the other approaches?
Well, there's another interesting one called the 60% solution. It was developed by Richard Jenkins.
Okay.
And it's a little different. It focuses more on keeping your committed expenses, those essential things like housing, transportation, and groceries, under 60% of your take-home pay.
Interesting. So it seems like there's not like a one-size-fits-all approach to budgeting.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's really about finding what works best for your individual situation.
Right. It's about flexibility, and adapting the framework to your unique needs and goals. Absolutely. And your money actually has another inspiring story about this. This guy named Jason, who used to live paycheck to paycheck. He started budgeting with just a simple spreadsheet, and guess what? He managed to become debt-free and financially secure.
Wow, that's awesome. So no fancy software or anything?
Nope, just consistency and mindfulness.
That's a good reminder that we don't always need these complicated systems or tools. Sometimes it's just about taking those first steps, even if they seem small. So we've talked about understanding enough, setting smart goals, and reframing our perspective on budgeting. What else can help us, really achieve that financial well-being we're all striving for?
Well, all the sources we're looking at, they emphasize the power of frugality.
Frugality.
Yeah, but not in the, depriving yourself kind of way. More like as a way to really align your spending with your values and your goals. What are your initial thoughts on frugality?
Honestly, I used to think frugality meant being cheap. But reading J.D. Roth's book, Your Money, he really reframed it for me.
Interesting. In what way?
He shares all these personal examples, of how these small frugal choices he made actually led to really significant savings over time.
Yeah.
And it just kind of clicked for me that it's not about deprivation, it's about being smart and intentional.
Yeah, and that reminds me of that old saying, a penny saved is more than a penny earned, especially when you think about the impact of taxes.
Right, right. Because it's not just the penny you're saving, it's also the taxes you're not paying on that penny,
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Roth points out how, these small frugal habits, they kind of ripple outwards.
Yeah.
Impacting all your spending decisions.
It's like a mindset shift.
It is, yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so while we're talking about all these smart spending choices, let's address something that I think can be a real obstacle for a lot of people on their path to financial well-being.
Debt.
Oh, for sure.
It's a tough one, right?
Yeah, it's something a lot of people struggle with. And it can feel really overwhelming, even shameful to talk about. Absolutely. So what can we do about it? How do we even begin to tackle that?
Well, the good news is it is possible to escape its clutches,
Yeah?
And Your Money actually lays out a very practical debt reduction plan. Have you had a chance to look at that?
I have, yeah. And I was really struck by how he emphasizes building an emergency fund before you even start tackling your debt head on. Why is that so important?
Yeah, that's a really key point. Roth stresses that having that emergency fund in place prevents you from, relying on credit cards when unexpected expenses pop up. It's about creating that safety net. He even goes so far as to suggest that people who are really struggling with credit card debt, they should actually destroy their cards, literally cut them up to break that cycle of overspending.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty drastic step. When is that, actually necessary?
Yeah, it's definitely not for everyone.
Right.
But for some people, it's that crucial step to regain control.
I can see that.
Yeah. And then once you have that emergency fund in place, you've addressed any, credit card issues, then you can focus on actually paying down the debt.
Okay, so how do we do that? What are the best strategies?
Well, Roth outlines a couple of different approaches. There's the highest interest rate method, where you focus on paying off the debts with the highest interest rates first to save money in the long run.
Okay.
And then there's the snowball method, where you
Sure.
pay off the smallest debts first to kind of build momentum and motivation.
Okay, that makes sense too. So it's
Yeah.
kind of whatever keeps you going.
Exactly. And you know what? He also acknowledges the emotional side of debt. Like sometimes he suggests tackling the debts that are causing you the most stress first, even if it's not like mathematically the most optimal approach.
I like that. It's about acknowledging that we're humans, not robots.
Totally. Motivation plays a huge role in actually sticking to a debt reduction plan.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of that human element, I'm curious to explore compulsive spending, which can also be a major roadblock to financial well-being. Oh, absolutely. What insights did you find in our sources about, you know, what causes it and how to overcome it?
Well, it was fascinating to see how both Your Money and Mind Over Money, which is a book by Brad and Ted Klontz, how they both delve into the psychology behind compulsive spending.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not just about willpower, right?
Right.
There are often emotional triggers, unconscious patterns. All these things can lead to those impulse buys that really sabotage our financial goals.
Absolutely. It's like, you know what you should be doing, but then you just end up doing something totally different.
Exactly. Like there's that disconnect between our logical minds and our emotional self.
Totally.
So the question is, how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's the big question. So what can we do about it? Are there any practical tips in the sources for, like, curbing those splurges?
Absolutely. And some of them are so simple, yet surprisingly effective.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So one strategy that Roth suggests is the 30-day rule. So whenever you feel that urge to buy something you didn't plan for,
Hmm.
you write it down and then you wait 30 days. And then after those 30 days, you reassess. Like, do you still really want it or need it?
That's interesting.
Yeah, kind of takes the emotion out of the moment,
And that gives you time to think things through.
Exactly. Another tip that can be really helpful is to switch to using cash for a while.
Cash.
Yeah, at least for your like discretionary spending. Because when you physically hand over those bills, it makes the act of spending much more real, and that can really deter those impulse buys.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. It's funny how something as simple as changing your payment method can actually have such a big impact on your spending habits.
Like a psychological trick.
It is, yeah. It's about outsmarting those impulses. But, sometimes those strategies aren't enough. And both Roth and the Klontzes in Mind Over Money, they really emphasize the importance of seeking support if you need it. Like if you're really struggling, there are resources out there to help you regain control.
Oh, that's good to know. Like what?
Well, they mention Debtors Anonymous, which can be a really great support system for people who are dealing with, compulsive spending and debt.
Okay.
And they also encourage exploring credit counseling services, which can help you negotiate with creditors and create a manageable debt management plan.
That's great. It's reassuring to know that there's help available when you need it.
Absolutely. It's not a journey you have to take alone.
Exactly. I really appreciate how these sources, they take like a holistic view of financial well-being. They're not just talking about practical strategies, but also about those emotional aspects.
Right. It's about the whole person.
Yeah. It's about understanding ourselves and our motivations.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's about aligning our financial choices with our values and aspirations, creating a life that feels, rich, both internally and externally. And speaking of a rich life, it's important to remember that frugality doesn't mean giving up all the fun.
Oh, that's a really good point. Being frugal doesn't have to be about deprivation,
Right.
right? There are still ways to enjoy life without, breaking the bank.
Absolutely. And, Trent Ham, who's actually featured in Your Money, he's a great example of this. He really focuses on the experience, not the price tag. He talks about rediscovering simple pleasures, going for nature walks, having game nights with friends, taking advantage of the library.
I love that they both, Roth and Ham, they both talk about the library as like this treasure trove of free entertainment.
Oh, it's amazing.
It is. Books, movies, music, even classes and workshops sometimes.
Yeah, it's incredible what you can find there. And it's all funded by our tax dollars, so we might as well make the most of it, right?
Absolutely. So beyond the library, what are some other frugal, fun ideas that you came across in the sources?
Well, Your Money also suggests exploring all the free community events that are out there, concerts in the park, festivals, open mic nights, all sorts of things.
Cool.
Or getting creative with things you already own, like host a clothing swap instead of buying new clothes, or have a movie marathon at home instead of going to the theater.
Those are really good ideas. It's all about shifting our mindset, isn't it?
Yeah.
Focusing on resourcefulness and creativity rather than just reaching for our wallets every time we want to have fun.
Exactly. It's not about deprivation. It's about being intentional with our choices and finding joy in experiences that don't cost a fortune. And, having fun for less can also free up more cash flow for other things, which reminds me of this really important concept that's emphasized in both Your Money and Your Money or Your Life, the power of positive cash flow.
Oh, yes. Positive cash flow. Can you explain what that means for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term?
Sure. So positive cash flow is basically the idea of spending less money than you earn.
Okay. Sounds simple enough.
Right. It sounds straightforward, but, so many people actually struggle with it.
Yeah, I can see that.
And Your Money breaks it down really clearly. It shows how even small changes can shift you from like negative cash flow to positive cash flow. And that really sets you up for a much more secure financial future.
So it's not just about the numbers, right?
Right.
There's an emotional component to it as well.
Absolutely. Like when you have positive cash flow, you feel so much more in control of your finances,
Right.
which can reduce a lot of stress and anxiety and really create that solid foundation for achieving your financial goals.
So what are some practical ways to actually create positive cash flow? I'm guessing it involves like both increasing your income and decreasing your expenses,
Right.
right?
You got it. It's a two-pronged approach.
Hmm.
On the income side, Your Money explores things like, negotiating a raise at your job, starting a side hustle, or even exploring freelance opportunities to boost your earning power.
Got it. So find ways to bring in more money. And then on the expense side,
On the expense side, we've already talked about the magic of frugality, right? Those small, consistent changes can make a huge difference over time. But again, it's not just about cutting back arbitrarily. It's about being mindful, prioritizing what truly matters to you,
yeah,
and aligning your spending with your values.
I like how you keep emphasizing that it's not about deprivation.
Right.
It's about making conscious choices that support the life you want to live.
Exactly. It's about creating a life that feels abundant and fulfilling, not restricted and deprived.
Now, we touched on compulsive spending earlier,
Yeah.
but Your Money also delves into the psychology of debt and how that can be a real emotional burden for people.
Oh, absolutely. Debt often carries a lot of shame with it,
Right.
and that can prevent people from, taking action or even seeking help.
So what can we offer our listeners who might be, struggling with debt? What's the message they need to hear?
I think, first and foremost, it's important to know that you are not alone.
Yeah,
Millions of people are dealing with debt, and there's absolutely no shame in seeking support.
that's so important.
Yeah, and Roth highlights some really great resources. Like he mentions Debtors Anonymous, which can be a fantastic support system for people who are struggling with compulsive spending and debt. And he also encourages exploring credit counseling services, which can help you negotiate with creditors and create a more manageable debt management plan.
That's great. Knowing that there are these resources and support systems available can make such a big difference. Sometimes we just need a little help navigating these tricky financial waters, right?
Absolutely. We don't have to figure it all out on our own.
Exactly. And speaking of help, Your Money also mentions this program called Financial Peace University, which was created by Dave Ramsey. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like a 13-week program that covers all sorts of personal finance topics: budgeting, saving, investing, and of course, debt reduction.
It's super comprehensive. It really walks you through step by step.
And I love that Roth actually shares his personal story of using those principles from Financial Peace University to pay off, get this, $35,000 in consumer debt.
Wow, that's incredible.
Talk about walking the talk, right?
Seriously. It's so inspiring. And it really shows that with the right knowledge, the right tools, and the right mindset, anyone can transform their relationship with money.
Absolutely. Now, I want to zoom out a bit and talk about a concept that came up in both Your Money and another book we have, The Millionaire Next Door. Thrifty millionaires. It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
Totally, yeah.
Like we tend to think of millionaires as these, lavish spenders. But that's not always the case, is it?
It's not. It's a common misconception, but research actually shows that many millionaires actually achieve their wealth through frugality.
Really?
Yeah, they're mindful with their money, they budget, they save, and they invest wisely. It's not always about earning a huge income. It's about making smart choices with the money you have.
I love that. So it's not just about luck or circumstance, right?
Yeah.
It's about developing the habits and the mindsets that actually support your goals.
Absolutely. And The Millionaire Next Door, which was written by Thomas Stanley and William Denko, it actually highlights some of the key habits of these thrifty millionaires. Like they live below their means, they shop for value, they negotiate, and they avoid unnecessary debt.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and they're not flashy, they're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're focused on building long-term wealth.
That's so empowering because it means that financial well-being isn't out of reach for most people. It's about making those smart choices consistently.
Exactly. It's about taking control and creating the future you want.
I love it. Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on one more really powerful concept from the sources. Conscious spending.
Oh, yes. Conscious spending. Such a good one.
What exactly does that mean? Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So, conscious spending is basically about being mindful and deliberate with every dollar you spend.
Okay.
It's about asking yourself, does this purchase align with my values? Does it support my goals? Or am I just giving in to an impulse or like some external pressure?
It's about moving away from that mindless consumerism, right?
Right.
And towards a more intentional, fulfilling relationship with money.
Exactly. And you know what's cool? When you start practicing conscious spending, you start to notice patterns in your own behavior. You become more aware of your triggers, your weaknesses, the things that truly bring you joy.
It's like self-awareness, but with your money.
It is, yeah.
And that awareness allows you to make choices that actually nourish your well-being, not just your wallet.
Right. And speaking of nourishment, your money actually dedicates a whole section to saving money on food, which is a major expense for most households.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Groceries can really add up. So what are some of Roth's tips for, like, reducing your grocery bill?
Well, he offers tons of great advice, like making a shopping list and sticking to it, comparing unit prices, buying in bulk when it makes sense.
Okay, those are good ones.
Yeah, and he even encourages challenging your brand loyalty, like asking yourself if that name brand cereal is really worth the extra cost, or if the store brand would be just as good.
That's a good point. I'm definitely guilty of brand loyalty sometimes.
Yeah, me too. It's
Mhm.
easy to fall into those traps.
So beyond, like, smart shopping strategies, what else does he suggest?
Well, he really stresses the importance of minimizing food waste, which, can be a huge drain on both our wallets and the environment.
Right, right.
And he also shares tips for dining out strategically,
Ooh, like what?
like eating lunch instead of dinner, because it's usually cheaper,
Good point.
or ordering appetizers as meals, or sharing entrees with a friend.
Those are such great reminders. It's amazing how much we can save with just a few mindful adjustments. And speaking of saving, your money also has some good advice for reducing utility costs, which is another area where those little changes can really add up. What are your favorite tips from the book?
Oh, there are so many good ones. Roth covers a lot of practical stuff, like turning off lights when you leave a room, unplugging electronics that aren't in use, and washing your clothes in cold water.
Those are all good ones. I was actually surprised by how much emphasis he put on using a programmable thermostat.
Oh, yeah. That can make a huge difference in your energy consumption over time.
It's one of those things you can just set it and forget it.
Exactly. And then he even talks about something as simple as, like, taking shorter showers to conserve water.
It's all about finding those areas where you can make small adjustments without really sacrificing your comfort or your lifestyle.
Exactly. Small changes, big impact. And then ideally, those savings can be redirected toward your financial goals, like paying off debt, building your emergency fund, or even investing for the future. Which actually brings us to something we haven't really explored much in this deep dive: investing.
That's true. We haven't talked much about investing, and I know it can be a little intimidating for some people.
Oh, for sure. But such an important part of building long-term wealth.
So where can our listener go if they want to learn more about investing? Do you have any recommendations for, like, resources they can check out?
Well, J.D. Roth, the author of Your Money, he actually has a fantastic blog called Get Rich Slowly. And it covers a wide range of personal finance topics, including investing. He does a really great job of breaking down things like choosing the right investments, understanding risk and reward, and exploring different investment strategies in a way that's easy to understand, even for beginners.
I love that, making those sometimes intimidating topics accessible for everyday people.
That's his gift, for sure. And there are tons of other great resources out there, too. Books, websites, even podcasts dedicated to helping people navigate the world of investing.
It's an ongoing learning process, for sure.
It is, yeah. It never really ends. But it can be really exciting and rewarding, too.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the psychology of money to practical tips for budgeting, saving, and even a little glimpse into investing. What's, like, the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with today?
I think the most important message is that financial well-being is achievable for everyone.
I love that.
It's not about luck or circumstance. It's about making conscious choices, developing healthy habits, and taking action, even if it's just one small step at a time.
Couldn't agree more. It's about shifting your mindset, reframing your relationship with money, and ultimately, creating a life that feels abundant, both financially and emotionally.
Beautifully said. Couldn't have said it better myself.
So there you have it. We've explored this fascinating connection between money and happiness, unpacking all sorts of insights and strategies from, some of the best minds in personal finance. I really hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas for you and inspired you to take control of your financial well-being. What resonated most with you today? And what one small step will you take today to move closer to your financial goals?
And you know what else your money talks about too? It's how a lot of those small frugal habits can also help you save money on big ticket
Oh,
items.
really? Like how?
Like, for example, when you're thinking about buying a car, right? Well, Roth suggests that instead of automatically going for that brand new model, you consider buying a used car that's a couple of years old.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Used cars are usually a lot cheaper.
Exactly. And they've already taken that big depreciation hit.
Right.
So you're getting more bang for your buck. And then he also suggests like really doing your research, shopping around for the best deals on financing, negotiating.
So it's about being a savvy consumer, even when you're making those big purchases.
Exactly. It's all connected. And it's not just about cars either. He
Hmm.
talks about like appliances, furniture, electronics, all those things where, you can often find great deals if you're patient and you're willing to put in a little effort.
I love that. It's like a treasure hunt.
It is, yeah. It's about being resourceful.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And I think that ties in nicely with this idea that we were talking about earlier about aligning your spending with your values.
right. Because when you're really clear about what's important to you, it makes the spending decisions so much easier.
Exactly. You're not as tempted by those impulse buys or, those things that don't really bring you lasting joy.
And another really interesting concept that came up in your money is this idea of lifestyle inflation.
Lifestyle inflation.
Have you heard of that?
I'm not sure, actually. What is that?
So basically, lifestyle inflation is what happens when our spending increases as our income increases. We get a raise or a promotion, and suddenly we feel like we need to upgrade our lifestyle to match.
Oh, yeah. I've totally seen that happen. People get a bigger paycheck and suddenly they need a bigger car, bigger house, all that.
Exactly. And the problem is, if our expenses are always rising along with our income, it can be really hard to make any progress towards our financial goals.
So how do we avoid that trap?
Well, Roth suggests being really mindful of those spending creep, like questioning those impulses to upgrade every time you get a little bit more money.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and thinking about, what truly brings you joy and fulfillment. Does a bigger house really equal more happiness? Or would you be just as happy or even happier in a smaller, more affordable home that gives you more financial freedom?
It's about prioritizing those experiences and those things that actually matter to you.
Exactly. And it might sound counterintuitive, but sometimes spending less can actually lead to a richer, more fulfilling life.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how to manage our money wisely. But I also want to touch on something that can be really challenging for a lot of people. Talking about money.
Ooh, yeah, that can be a tough one.
Right, like whether it's with our partners, our families, or even our friends, money can be such a taboo subject.
It is, yeah. It's often seen as like impolite or even rude to talk about.
Exactly. But I think these sources really highlight the importance of open and honest communication when it comes to finances.
Absolutely. Like, for example, your money talks about the importance of having regular money dates with your partner. Yeah. It's basically like setting aside dedicated time to talk about your finances together,
Hmm. Okay.
to check in on your budget, your goals, any concerns you might have. And it doesn't have to be like a super serious formal thing.
Right.
You could make it fun, have a glass of wine, order takeout, whatever makes you feel comfortable. The important thing is to create that space for open and honest dialogue.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine those conversations can be even more challenging when you're talking about money with family members or friends.
Oh, definitely. But your money actually offers some really helpful tips for navigating those conversations. Like, for example, if you're constantly being asked for money by a friend or family member, he suggests setting clear boundaries and maybe even offering to help them create a budget or find resources to get their finances back on track.
That's a good idea. So it's not just about saying no, it's about offering support and maybe some guidance as well.
Exactly. It's about coming from a place of love and compassion, but also being firm and clear about your own financial boundaries.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground today, from frugal fun to the psychology of spending to the importance of open communication. I'm curious, what's resonating most with you so far? Like, what's one thing you're going to take away from this deep dive and maybe try to implement in your own life?
Yeah, and it's not just about saving money either. It's also about being more environmentally conscious.
Right, for sure. Okay, so all these things we've been talking about, budgeting, frugality, conscious spending, it all seems to kind of revolve around this idea of mindful living, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great way to put it. It's about being present in our lives, both with our money and with everything else.
It's like being aware of the choices we're making and making sure they're aligned with what we truly value.
Exactly. And when we do that, we naturally start to move away from that mindless consumerism and towards a more intentional, more fulfilling way of life.
So how do we actually cultivate that mindfulness in our daily lives, right? Like, are there any specific practices or techniques that you've found helpful?
Well, one thing that I personally find really helpful is to practice gratitude. Just taking a few moments each day to really appreciate the things that I have in my life, both big and small.
Okay, yeah, gratitude. That makes sense.
Yeah, it helps to shift my focus away from what I'm lacking and toward what I already have.
Right, it's like changing your perspective.
Exactly. And another thing that I find really helpful is to simplify my life. Decluttering my home, getting rid of stuff that I don't need or use anymore.
Okay, so less stuff, more experiences, right?
Exactly. Because when you have less stuff, you have more time and energy for the things that truly matter.
I'm probably less stressed too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Clutter can be so overwhelming. And then there's also, meditation. Mindfulness meditation can be a really powerful tool for developing that awareness of our thoughts and our emotions, which can be so helpful when it comes to managing our money.
Right, because often those like impulse purchases, they come from a place of, emotional need or insecurity or whatever.
Yeah. And meditation can help us to kind of pause and observe those impulses before we act on them.
That's so powerful. It's like giving yourself that space to make a more conscious choice.
Exactly. And it's not just about the internal stuff either. It's also about being mindful of the external influences that are shaping our spending habits.
Yeah.
All those advertising messages and societal pressures that tell us we need to buy more stuff to be happy.
Oh yeah, we're constantly bombarded with those messages, aren't we?
We are, and it can be really hard to resist, especially if we're not aware of their influence.
So how do we like filter out all that noise? How
Yes.
do we protect ourselves from those external pressures?
Well, one thing that can be really helpful is to limit your exposure to advertising. Unsubscribe from those tempting email lists, unfollow those social media accounts that are constantly pushing products on you.
Okay. Less social media, less ads.
Right. And then also surround yourself with people who support your values.
Hmm.
People who aren't obsessed with material possessions, people who prioritize experiences over stuff.
Your tribe.
Exactly, because our social circles have a huge influence on our spending habits, whether we realize it or not.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly. So choose wisely.
So we've talked a lot about what we can do as individuals to cultivate a more mindful, more intentional relationship with money. But I'm also curious, do you think there's a role for systemic change as well? Like, what can we do as a society to shift our focus away from this relentless pursuit of more, more, more?
That's a really great question, and I think it's an important one to consider. Because, yeah, individual action is crucial, but it's not enough. We also need to address the systemic issues that are driving this consumerist culture.
So what are some potential solutions?
Well, one thing that's being talked about a lot these days is the idea of a shorter work week, reducing the standard 40-hour work week to, say, 30 or 32 hours. Yeah. The idea is that by giving people more free time, they'll naturally have less need to consume, less need to work long hours to afford all the stuff that they think they need to keep up with the Joneses.
So it's like a cultural shift towards valuing time over money.
Exactly. And there are a lot of other potential solutions out there, too. Reforming our education system to teach kids about financial literacy and mindful consumption from a young age.
Right, starting early.
Yeah. Supporting businesses that are committed to ethical and sustainable practices, voting for politicians who prioritize policies that promote well-being over economic growth at all costs.
Yeah, so many possibilities.
Yeah.
It's really about changing the narrative, isn't it? Shifting our collective values away from this idea that happiness is about acquiring more stuff and toward a more holistic understanding of what it means to live a good life.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that true wealth lies in our relationships, our health, our communities, and our connection to the natural world.
Beautifully said. Okay, so we've come to the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of personal finance and mindful living. We've explored so much, from the psychology of money to practical tips for budgeting, saving, and investing. We've talked about the power of frugality and conscious spending, the importance of open communication, and the potential for systemic change. I hope this deep dive has inspired you to take control of your finances, cultivate a more mindful relationship with money, and ultimately create a life that feels truly rich and fulfilling. What resonated most with you from our conversation today? And what one small step will you take this week to move closer to your financial goals and create the life you truly desire?